Hi, good afternoon. I'm Walter Johnson. I am the director of the Charles Warren Center. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you all here this afternoon. I guess it's my pleasure to welcome you all, and it's my honor to convene this panel. This is part of what I think of as our eyewitnesses to catastrophe series at the Warren Center. And so a couple of weeks ago we had Albert Woodfox and Robert King, two of the Angola 3 men who spent decades in solitary confinement in Angola prison in Louisiana. We have this panel, and I want to announce a couple of other things that we have coming up. On March the 30th from 4 to 6 in Emerson 210, we're going to have a panel on undocumented knowledge, students, borders, and the politics of sanctuary, and that's going to bring together both some activists, some professors, and some undocumented students from all over the world. On April the 5th, we're going to have an event. We're actually still working on the location for this event, but it's going to start at 5 and it's going to go till 10. It's called Word, Sound, Struggle, Hip Hop, Spoken Word, and the Fight for Brown and Black Lives. And this is an event that's going to bring together activists against anti-black racism, activists against Islamophobia. I have a recent lead on a hip hop artist from near Standing Rock, who I think we're going to try and get in. So South Asian, Islamic, black hip-hop artists and activists. That's going to go from 5 to 10. It's going to be both people talking about their work and some a cappella performances. So I commend that one to you. And then I want to announce also the American Studies program is hosting the Massey Lectures this year. The Massey Lecture is going to be Winona LaDuke on climate change, indigenous resistance, and forging a new democracy, thoughts for the present moment. And those lectures are going to be in the first 3 days of May. First, second, third at 4. The first two are at 5:30 p.m. The third one is at 4:30 p.m. And they're all going to be in the Sackler Auditorium on Broadway. So a lot of terrific and pertinent events this spring. It is my honor to introduce Shelly Lowe. Shelly is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Ganado, Arizona. She is currently the executive director of the Harvard University Native American program, with whom we have cooperated in organizing this event and to whom we are grateful. Can I just put a footnote on here and thank my staff? I mean, I am such an ungracious person, but I want to thank Arthur Pattenhock, Monique McCall, and Jackie Wheeler. So I have, increasingly kind of taken on this identity as the Miss Frizzle of American academia. I'm like, okay, where are we going to, we're going to take the magic school bus somewhere today, and let's organize an event, and it's going to happen a week from now. And so they have done enormous work both on this event and all the other events. Now we've got to return to our regularly scheduled programming. I'm going to start introducing Shelly again. Shelly Lowe is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Ganado, Arizona. She's currently the executive director of the Harvard University Native American program and was previously the assistant dean for Native American Affairs in the Yale College Dean's Office and director of the Native American Cultural Center at Yale University. Prior to her position at Yale, she spent 6 years as the graduate education program facilitator for American Indian Studies programs at the University of Arizona. Lowe is currently a member of the National Endowment for the Humanities Council, an appointment she received from President Obama, and one that we hope will be indefinitely extended. Talk about, eyewitnesses to history and frontline fighters. She has served on the board of the National Indian Education Association and on the board of trustees for the National Museum of the American Indian. So please welcome Shelly Lowe.
Thank you, Walter. Yat Shelly Lowe Yenishe, Bilagana Nishle, Nanastasia Tachini Bashachi, Bilagana Dashache, Do Trabahan Dashanale, Locantiel de Nasha. As Walter said, my name is Shelly Lowe. I'm the Executive Director of the Harvard University Native American Program. I want to first acknowledge the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc people whose land we are on, and we thank them for allowing us to be here. I want to say welcome from Hunap. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to join us this afternoon. We have some of our students in the audience, and I know they are delighted to have our speakers here today and to listen to the perspectives on the history of No Dapple. I also want to thank Walter and the staff of the Warren Center for putting this panel together, and to the speakers who have traveled here today to be with us. The couple of days before Winona LaDuke is here, at the beginning of May, we will host our annual Harvard Powwow, April 29th. So you can mark your calendars for that. It will be in a new location this year. We are moving up to the Quad. I know it's so far away. Bigger space, please look for posters. We've got quite a few of our Powwow Planning Committee here in the room. So look for them and ask them questions. Before we get started, we are going to start with a blessing, and I want to introduce the person who's going to give our blessing today. Jennifer Edwards Weston is a researcher who has worked for the past 2 decades with tribal community programs focused on cultural resiliency, environmental justice, education, and language revitalization. She has written for the Lakota Nation Journal, Cultural Survival Quarterly, and Our Mother Tongues. And she has served as an associate producer for the PBS series We Shall Remain, A Native History of America. Weston also works as a consulting producer for Indigenous film and documentary projects. Currently, she serves as project director for the Wampanoag Language Immersion Preschool and language department director for the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. Since 2014, she has co-taught a civic engagement scholarship initiative course at UMass Boston entitled Native American Women in North America, Indigenous Mother Tongues, Leadership, and Self-Determination. Weston is Hunkpapa Lakota and was born and raised on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in the Dakotas, where she has served her tribal government as environmental outreach coordinator and grant writer. I want to welcome Jennifer up.
Bete Washday, Desa Washday, Desa Washday emachiapi, naha ia woslahe, wichote emataha, toka ola naha niakie yusapi emataha. Good afternoon, everyone. As Shelly said, I'm from Standing Rock. I'm from the Shoots the Enemy and the Take No Life families, and it's wonderful to be here with you today and to be able to offer some words of prayer in Wampanoag, one of the indigenous languages. Manet ka nikona hachik. Katabatanamu wachi wami kiakusanish. Katabatanamu wachi kisak. Katabatanamu wachi anakosak. Katabatanamu wachi aki. Katabatanamu wachi sipuash. Katabatanamu wachi katahanash. Katabatanamu wachi wami awa asak. Katabatanamu wachi wami natonkosak. Ananama anian namanat wipi wanikak. Ananama anian asinat wipi sompak. Creator and ancestors, I thank you for all things. I thank you for the sky, for the stars, for the land, for the rivers, for our oceans. I thank you for all creatures. I thank you for all of our relations. Help us to see only what is good. Help us to do only what is right. Oh, mitakiwasi.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And now it's my pleasure and my distinct nervousness to introduce our panel today. I had to learn some Lakota words, and forgive me if I mispronounce them or do it incorrectly. The students have been watching me and listening to me trying to say these words for a couple of days. On our panel today, Assistant Professor of American Indian Studies and History, Jase Cooney DeCory, Lakota of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, has served on the faculty of Black Hills State University since 1984 and is a 2014 recipient of the Black Hills State University Distinguished Faculty Award. Professor DeCory is the author of numerous publications on Lakota culture and the role of American Indian and Lakota women, and is noted for her cultural presentations on Lakota history, art, philosophy, American Indian women, and cultural change. We want to welcome Jase DeCory. Nick Estes is Kuwichasha from the Lower Brule Sioux tribe. He is a doctoral candidate in American Studies at the University of New Mexico and an Andrew W. Mellon Dissertation Fellow. His journalism on border town violence for Indian Country Today won a Native American Journalism Association Award. Estes' forthcoming book, Mini Wachoni, Water is Life, Death, Liberation, places no dapple into context within the longer histories of indigenous resistance against the trespass of settlers, dams, and pipelines across the Minnesota, the Missouri River. In 2014, Estes co-founded the Red Nation, a native-led coalition dedicated to Native liberation. We want to welcome Nick. Louis Grassrope is Lower Brule Sioux tribe, serves as a headman of Kuwichasha Oyate. He has been active in the Ochete Shakuin pipeline prayer encampments, beginning with the Te Oshbiye spiritual camp founded outside Bridger, South Dakota, near the pathway of the Keystone XL pipeline. During August 2016, Grassrope helped establish the intertribal Ochete Shakuin camp on traditional treaty land north of the Cannonball River. Welcome, Louis. Chase Ironeyes is Lakota from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and is a graduate of the University of North Dakota and the Sturm College of Law at the University of Denver. Ironeyes is a former tribal judge in North Dakota, serves as South Dakota counsel for the Lakota People's Law Project, and is a co-founder of the blog LastRealIndians.com, which helped lead an online fundraising effort on behalf of the Ochete Shakuin to regain control of Peshla, one of their most sacred sites in the Black Hills. We want to welcome Chase today. Jeffrey Ostler is Beacom Professor of Northwest and Pacific History at the University of Oregon. He specializes in the history of the American West with a particular focus on American Indian history. Ostler is the author of Lakotas and the Black Hills, The Struggle for Sacred Ground, Viking Press 2010, and The Plains, Sioux and U.S. Colonialism from Lewis and Clark to Wounded Knee, Cambridge University Press 2004. Welcome, Jeffrey. And our moderator today is Lisa McGirr, professor of history at Harvard University. She specializes in the history of 20th century United States. Her research and teaching interests bridge the fields of social and political history and focus in particular on collective action, state building, reform movements, and politics. She has researched on the American penal state, transnational social movements, and the intersection of religion and politics in the 20th century U.S. And I will welcome Lisa. I will turn the panel over to you.
Okay, I am the moderator for today, and I'm going to briefly sort of lay out the format and then get us started. Before I do, I just want to sort of say a brief personal note about how honored I am to be able to moderate this panel. This is, I think, an incredibly important sort of moment after a year of really significant struggle at Standing Rock. I had the privilege of being able to witness for a few days the incredible devotion, dedication, passion, sacrifice, and spirit that was evident on the ground at Ochete Sakowan in the camp. I came in an auspicious moment after, in late October, about 140 folks had been arrested, and the camp was in a moment of crisis, but also in a moment of high functionality, and you could feel there just incredible meaning for the grandmothers, the grandfathers, families that had come from near and far to be there. And so what was clear was that this was about the water and about protecting the water supplies, but it was far more about history, about a very long and deep history. And so it does seem appropriate to look at the context of the struggle within the perspective of history. As historians, we're often trained, and we train our students to think about the pastness of the past, the distance from the contemporary moments, the alienness, the ways that we've transformed, the ways social structures have changed and mentalities. What you see, it's what you see, or what I saw at Standing Rock and what is impossible to miss is the very presentness of the past, the way the past continues to shape mentalities, consciousness, social structures, and struggle. So with no further ado, and with great appreciation and respect for all of those who have come here today to be with us and to talk to us about this, I want to open up the format of the panel, which is basically to offer about 5 minutes for each of our panelists to talk in a kind of opening statement around a question about history, which is to ask you all to think a little bit about the role, how you see the role of history in the current struggle, the current ongoing struggle, even though the camps themselves have been dismantled. The place of, and look at the place also of the current struggle in history, how we want to understand it and some of its legacies. So each panelist will start starting with Louis and then go across. We'll have about 5 minutes. Then perhaps we'll have you respond to one another depending on how it goes, and then open it up for the audience to be able to engage sets of questions thereafter. So Louis, would you like to stand, or how would you like to? Yes, okay.
Oh, matakiapia. We chak bikasapa, imachiapia, yellow. I come from Kuichasha Oshpe, from Lala, Daniel Pejiwakan, Garfield, Joseph, and Maate, Justin Pejiwakan. I come from the Pejiwakan Teoshpe. Also a part of the Brave Eagle Teoshpe of Ogulala also. My name is Louis Grassrope. I'm from the Lower Sioux tribe. Actually, come from the names that I presented to you come from my great-grandfather, Daniel Grassrope. That was a part of history at one time, in his time also. And I think the question was to sit here and ask about the history of history during Standing Rock, but to me it was I'll give you a little brief history. As I went there in August of of last year, and I was there till March. So for me, during the whole moment, from the first time that I stepped on that ground until the time that I left, was a very historical moment for me in my life, and for the many others that were there also, and the many others that supported in this great endeavor that would happen at Standing Rock. I guess it was a very very powerful experience for me to be a part of the movement and actually answering our relatives' call when they called for us to come there. They called on all of the Petal Shakawi or Ocheti Shakawi, however you want to pronounce it. But for me, I'd say Petal Shakawi because that's 7 fires. So when they made the call, we all threw down what we did in our life. We gave up everything and went to the heat of our relatives' call, in which brings up the notion of this way of life that we believe in Lakota, is that to be a good relative to each other, no matter what nation you come from or what ethnicity. It was always about standing up for what is right. The things that happened in Standing Rock was for the water, and to save that water, because it's mini wichoni. It's water's life. But it became something important when we first came there. Like I was explaining earlier, was that when I first stepped on that ground, I didn't think it was going to be anything more than just the Sioux Nation coming there. And during the time period, there was many ethnicities from all over the world. And it kind of became a time of prophecy for us. A 7th generation prophecy where there was many nations that would come together in one area and to create a powerful message for the world. And it was the youth that started it, and they completed their task. And the ripple effects from what happened in Standing Rock awakened the world. It was a deal of actually trying to find out, it was a actual point to all of us. We got to remember who we are. We don't really think about that too much. We forgot who we are as people, and that comes from every ethnicity. No matter where you come from, indigenous nation, whatever indigenous nation you come from, you were actually caretakers and protectors of that land, of that water. And that's what that was about. And it was about the many generations to come. It ain't about us. It was never about us. It was never about any of us that have been sitting there. It was about our children, their children, the children to come. They got to have a future. Can't have a future if we can't have good water, and we can't have land to live on. So for me, the historical point and the things that happened, it was a repetitive cycle of history. If you ever take a look into the history of every ethnicity, we all share almost the same traumatic history in similarity. But up there at Standing Rock, it showed how, for us, how the government steps in and pushes us off land and takes away the things, and they just come take and take. But it's about, the thing that I think the government, or I'll just kind of put this out there, is when I talk about being a good relative, I'd be a good relative to all of you here, and I would invite you to my lands, and I would share everything with you, because then I invited you. But with that statement alone, didn't we invite everybody that came here? And look where we're at now. Look who got mistreated. Look who faced genocide and faced everything. What this government created was survivors. And most of us all became survivalists in a way. It was a very powerful thing to sit there and see those survival techniques all come to play up in Standing Rock. So there was a lot. There's much more to everything, and I just wanted to be reminded that I'm here because, and it's my honor to be in front of you. I'm actually sweating up a storm right now. I'm nervous. Forgive me, but I want to say it's my honor to be in front of you, to even speak, and it's been a great endeavor, but I know that you were all there with me in spirit when we was all at those grounds. And it wasn't just a matter of fictitious things. It was the power of that camp, and the power of those camps was beyond a time of people think about a mythical and a magical time. For me, that's what that was. We talk about mitakuye uyase, all relations. Well, that's what happened at that place. Every relation came together. Plant life, animal nation, every ethnicity of our kind all came together in one area to stand there to protect water. And most of us got to remember that through the little time I was there, we did have people come there that were drawn to their spirit was drawn there. It wasn't because of social media. It was because they had a dream or something came to them. And they came to that ground and they felt that one. Everybody that came to that ground became united in that way and restored an old connection that we all forgot to practice kinship. So it's about as much as I want to say. So, whoopla.
very honored to be a part of this panel with people who've been really on the ground on what is, I think, we all know, one of the most important issues of our time. I'm a 19th century historian. I've followed events at Standing Rock over the past several months. One of the things that struck me and what I thought I would say is the ways in which I've seen things that echo an earlier history of settler colonialism in the 19th century. And I want to just talk about two historical moments and how it seems that they resonate with what we've observed. The first historical moment is 1874, when a U.S. military expedition led by George Armstrong Custer confirmed rumors of gold in the Black Hills of western South Dakota, sacred land for the Lakotas, recognized as their territory under the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. And the following year, in an effort to delegitimize Lakota claims to the Black Hills, the United States sent a second military expedition into the hills, this one led by Richard Dodge. Dodge wrote a report about this expedition, which, to put it bluntly, was a bundle of lies. The Black Hills, he wrote, have never been a permanent home for any Indians. The Lakotas did not want to retain the Black Hills, he said. They would, quote, willingly give them to the whites. The only thing stopping them from doing so was an Indian ring, a small group of scheming white men who had grown fat on Indian contracts. Dodge's report did contain evidence contradicting his argument and demonstrating the religious significance of the Black Hills. At one point, he came upon signs of a large camp of Indians that had been in a certain area right before, noted the remains of what he described as a medicine lodge, but he quickly asserted that the purpose of this camp was simply temporary to gather lodge poles. So with that in mind, to the present moment, when I hear accounts of pipeline protesters, or not protesters, proponents, dismissing the water protectors' claims that the pipeline's construction has damaged graves and other sacred sites, and that it threatens a sacred resource, water. When I read accounts or hear accounts of pipeline proponents dismissing those claims, I can't help but place them in a long history of settler colonial claims that I guess we could put this way, that Indians don't really know what they're talking about when they say that their lands and water are valuable and have religious importance and are under threat. A second historical moment, in the fall of 1890, the United States authorized a massive military invasion of the Sioux reservations. The purpose of this invasion was to destroy a nonviolent religious political movement that has become known as the Ghost Dance. Nelson Miles, the general who commanded this invasion, justified the suppression of the Ghost Dance, again, to put it bluntly, by lying about the movement and its leaders to newspapers and in official documents. One of what he described as the principal incendiaries behind the movement was Sitting Bull. From his home on the Standing Rock Reservation, Miles alleged, Sitting Bull had sent emissaries to tribes throughout the American West, quote, advising them to obtain arms and ammunition and be prepared to meet the warriors near the Black Hills in the spring. Because of this, Miles claimed, quote, the most serious Indian war of our history was imminent. The states of Nebraska, the two Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, and the territory of Utah, quote, were liable to be overrun by a hungry, wild, mad horde of savages. So to the present, when I hear statements by pipeline advocates, including public officials, that the water protectors are terrorists, and they've been described this way many times. I can't help but see these statements as yet another in a long line of false claims about the illegitimacy of Native resistance. So I see a lot of continuity in settler colonial discourses from the 19th century to the present. Discourses and tactics do change, of course, in contrast to the 1870s when government officials refused to admit that the Black Hills were sacred land altogether. Some pipeline opponents today, or proponents, I mean to say, do gesture to the fact that there are sacred sites along the pipeline route, only then to quickly say that they have taken pains to avoid them. And in contrast to 1890, when U.S. armed forces slaughtered 250 or more Lakotas at Wounded Knee, military action against the water protectors has not led to massacre, though violence and the threat of violence remain powerful tools in enforcing settler society's desires.
Lakota me ni me wea tokahe mi japi api Jace DeCory imachi api Jase Cooney mitaki api. Thank you, relatives. I'm glad you're here. You're my relatives, all of you on the panel, my relatives, and I welcome you here. Thank you for being here, and I'm thankful to the Creator that I'm here. There's a reason for me to be here today. I welcome you with a warm heart and a handshake. I come from the Lakota Nation, and I come from both sides in my family. My father's father is from the Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm a Cooney from there, so I may be some of your direct relatives here. My father's mother is a fielder from the Cheyenne River Reservation, so I may be related to some of you from Cheyenne River. My mother's mother and mother's father are from Standing Rock, and so one of my relatives here, Chase, is I call him my nephew, and so he is from that reservation. And so I'm happy to be on the panel with one of my nephews. And I found out today, we're all related somehow, Lewis's sister, two sisters are married to former students and also one of my nephews. So we're all related, we talk about that. But I always want to acknowledge the elders first when I give talks. I'm an elder now. I used to say I'm an elder in training, but now I'm an elder because I'm 65, and I'll be 66 this August, and I'm retiring this year, so I'm going to be doing other things. But I always like to acknowledge my elders and my family elders. And one of those elders is, I talk about my Scholastica, my grandmother Scholastica Madbear, but this is where she comes from, and this is my relative, Chief Madbear. He was an Itancha, and our Tioshpai is Madbear, and we're from along the Missouri River on the shoreline. That's where our allotted land was. That's where we lived. Our family lived along the Missouri River and close to the Missouri River before it was inundated by the Pick-Sloan Act, the piece of legislation that was passed to establish the Oahe Dam along in North and South Dakota. I have a lot of sad stories to talk about that, but I want to say that my grandmother was very saddened because their lands were flooded. And then we talk about flooding lands now with oil, gas pipelines, and so forth. But it seems like history repeats itself, like Dr. Ostler was talking about. But along the Missouri River, the cultural loss, the habitat loss, the wild grapes, the trees, the medicines, the shiaka, the medicines that grew along that area, that was our connection, our spiritual connection to the water, the Missouri River, but also to the things that grew along that area. And so I grew up thinking about water as sacred, because of the Missouri and also because of our homelands there, that connection. I also think about McGirr, the picture that I showed you, whose remains had to be disinterred because he was buried along the shoreline there, and they had to remove his remains and put it further up, above ground, further up to higher lands. And so he was reburied in the Catholic cemetery. And I also think about the Catholic cemetery and where the Catholic Church is now in Wakpala, where my mother grew up and lived. That land was traditionally our allotted land and in our family. But one of our family members at one time, and I'm not sure it was Francis, I think it was John, his son, that donated that land to the Catholic Church. But when I look at the Catholic Church and that cemetery, I think in my mind, those were our traditional homelands, and I have that personal connection to that, and that's what I've taught my two sons, to always know that your ancestors gave up these lands so that there would be a burial place for our relatives, and also so that they would have a place to pray. Even though I'm not really practicing Catholic now, I believe in the Lakota way of the pipe, the chanupa. I still honor my relatives who are Catholics. And I want to show you a picture of a relative that I want to honor today by my presentation here. And she's the elder in here. I don't know if you can see way up there, but she is 100 years old. She is the oldest resident on Standing Rock, and her name is Therese Martin. And she is from the McGirr Tioshpai. And she grew up along the Missouri River that I was talking about out in the country in McGirr's camp. And so my Aunt Teresa and I talked a lot about the old days, the good old days. And I've learned a lot from her as well as from my parents and those that had that connection to the land. When Lewis was talking about that kinship, that relationship with Takie relatives, we're talking about being in Lakota in balance with the world around you, and that includes our relatives, our human relatives, but it also includes other things in the universe. How do we treat one another as relatives, human relatives, with civility and respect, and how do we treat our environment? Because the environment, we as Lakota people and as Native people look upon that as our relative as well. We live here because our ancestors lived. As Lewis said, we survived. Well, we've survived as a people because our ancestors did not give up. They weren't wusses. They didn't wuss out. We are resilient. We're strong. We're spiritual people. Our voices are being heard. Finally, the people, and it says that in our prophecy that people will start listening but unfortunately it'll be because things have gone awry, things have gone wrong. Then they will start listening to our words. One of my mentor elders was a very wonderful medicine man named Matowambli. It was his Lakota name. Fool's Crow was his Indian name. But Grandpa Fool's Crow, always taught us to be strong spiritually and try to live the best way that we can with the world around us. And those teachings I still hold today. Make that connection to the universe always, every day. So every day I wake up with putting out tobacco. I put out water, pray with water and put it out. I feed the spirits whenever we eat. And so those are the kinds of things, those spiritual teachings that I'm happy to say that our young people are getting back to, because they realize that they're giving back and they're not just taking from the environment. They have to always give back and be caregivers. So when I was thinking about this, I know, did I go over 5 minutes already? Yeah. Remember now, we're all faculty, well, some of us are faculty members, and so when you give us the mic and you get in front of a classroom, you gotta think about, I'll just talk for a little bit more. I just want to say something from one of my former students. She sent me a statement. Her name is Mallory Moon, and she's wanting to get into law school someplace. I said, you should go to Harvard. You should apply to law school at Harvard. Anyway, she graduated from Black Hills State, but she spent, I just want to say a few words from her statement. Our Our family joined the Sacred Zone camp in the resistance against the Dakota Access Pipeline in early August. As tribal members of the Standing Rock, we are also seventh generation waterland protectors. And her relative is Chief Bighead, from who she's related to. And she said, this area of Standing Rock is very sacred. It is a place where no enemy blood has ever been spilt. This is a sacred spiritual place where the two rivers meet, the Cannonball and the Missouri, otherwise known as now Lake Oahe, and the backwaters of Lake Oahe. There is a sacred swirl in the water that forms sacred rocks that look like a cannonball, and many tribes come and share this place. If you ever go there, these round stones that come up, they'll wash onto the shore still today. And if you get one of those stones, they're very important, and the Spirit Creator has given you that to pray with and doctor people with. And so we still have those. When they talk about spiritual connections to different places, it's just more than, well, water certainly, but there are things that come from those waters that are also sacred that we use in our ceremonies that are important. So she reminded me of that even in that little bit that I read from you, for you. I have a whole statement here, but I'll just read the last thing. We are relatives of the Stone Age. We are related to everything, to all things. The mountains, the trees, the stars from which our spirits come to earth. It is in our ancient Lakota DNA to be protectors of our homelands and to preserve Unchimaka's resources. The battle cry Miniwachoni has and always will be our collective prayer. Water is life. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hamadaki api chante washday nape chayu zapelo ikopa shnimani malakol chaje ikopa shnimani hemachayelo ia wasla emataha ocheti shakoi makoche emataha. My name is Chase Iron Eyes. I come from the lands of the great Sioux Nation, as the world knows. The Sioux Nation encompasses what is now North Dakota, what is now South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, Minnesota, lots of provinces, a couple provinces up in what is now Canada. And I was born and raised on Standing Rock, and throughout this struggle, I joined the struggle I was there tentatively in the No DAPL fight, the most monumental and absolutely historical. But for me, it is. I don't even know if I like the word history, because it presents an idea to you. It presumes that you are going to think in a linear or a chronological fashion, which in our academia, not our, but the academia of the West, the institutions of the West, the languages, the concept of the written word that has come from somewhere. I don't know where that came from. Maybe Sumer or something like that. But all of those archetypes, they're kind of like railroads, and we are born into them if you are born speaking the English language first. And so all the collective, history, I'll just use the word history, of those institutions are going to inform how we color our universe or our multiverse, how we perceive it, how we make sense of it, how we center ourselves in it, how we know it. And for the No DAPL struggle, for me, the challenge has been on how to unite people, how to unite modern humans living in our hemisphere that we civilized millennia before anybody stumbled upon it, anybody invaded it, before the word Indian existed, before English syllables were uttered in our hemisphere. And one clear way to do that was other ancient syllables which were uttered, the words or the phrase mini wichoni, which means water is life, but it probably means something much deeper in Lakota etymology, if you were to look there. So I recently ran for the United States Congress in North Dakota against a Trump surrogate, and I got hammered up there. But as I was traveling around North Dakota, it was real life to me that even the concept of white people was not, that it was a human construct, that it was inaccurate and maybe even dehumanizing for me to address these people who are descendants of what we in America are taught to call, pioneers or explorers. And indeed, they are, because that was the first time that they were entering territory which we had civilized before that. But I learned to call them Germans or Norwegians or Russians or Poles or whatever cultural or ethnic background that they happen to come from. And I mention these because mini wichoni, when we go out there into the world and we say water is sacred, a lot of people don't have the cosmology or the mythology or the religion, if you want to call it, whether you call it religion or myths or cosmology or woke sape, whatever you call that, a lot of people don't have the prerequisite understandings or rituals or way to interpret that phrase, that water is sacred. For a lot of people, water is completely taken for granted, completely commodified. The cost of water isn't even incorporated into our energy economy, our food economy. We take it completely for granted. And the people who are invested in privatized water the world over understand that water is the foundation of all real economic value, which translates into the political, legal, and economic realities that modern human beings are being forced to live in, all of us. For me, in this process, even addressing and uniting people on the word colonization, because I grew up on an Indian reservation surrounded by quote unquote Indian people. So my Indian complexes were deep and took a lot of work and are still taking a lot of work for me to transcend them or to liberate from them. But it's not just Indian people or brown people or black people, Indian people who were colonized, upon whom genocides and holocausts were inflicted. It's just not black people who were enslaved. I mean, and I don't mean to gloss over that at all, but we can concentrate on that all day long. And we probably will in a Trump administration, those visceral divisions and human classifications that we have concentrated on for so long can take up a lifetime. But for me, colonization not only represents what happened to us, but what happened to you. Those of you who are of Anglo descent, who were separated from your food source at some point back in the line, whose minds were separated from their spirits somewhere back there when Descartes started talking what he was talking about, how human beings inherited a divine right to rule over and to possess and assert dominion over other living things, which is completely contradictory to our cosmology and our worldview, our original nations. And at some point, all of our labor was separated from labor was separated from meaning. There was an abstraction, a separation, and it comes with the creation of currency, whether that's mineral-based or whether it's fiat. It comes with the extractive industries that are at play out in Standing Rock. And so for me, I just wanted to make some introductory remarks about how I have been trying to process this, because what I saw happen at Standing Rock was a successful psychological operation by people like Tiger Swan, who are operating in the Middle East in actual theaters of war in Standing Rock and successfully racializing this fight and painting the picture that this is a group of unlawful Indians who are stealing livestock, who are killing livestock, who are making white farmers and ranchers who want quiet and peaceful lives fear for their own safety. They're now having to carry firearms. You saw that play out in Standing Rock. When we talk about these historic parallels, that's one of them. The remilitarization, the reactivation of a military fort, Fort Rice, that General Alfred Sully built after he massacred 400 Dakota at Whitestone Hill. And those survivors swam across the river and are now living at Cannonball, North Dakota. Sully crosses the river, establishes Fort Rice, and when I was arrested for felony inciting a riot on February 1st, they transported us north of the most militarized blockade in North Dakota history, and I was able to see that the Indian wars have never ended. That fort is reactivated. There's military there and tons of armaments. Another is in 1875, December 3rd, the Department of the Army said to those of us who had not moved to the reservation yet that if we did not return to our places of confine, that we would be considered hostile. And the full weight of the United States military would be used to subdue us. Sometime in November of 2016, the Department of the Army, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, issues another dictate that says, if you do not vacate these premises, if you do not return to your places of confine, those of you who are from Standing Rock and who are living there from Standing Rock, you will be declared trespassers. And so you see that history is living. There is no history according to some, according to how you want to see it. And so now we have, what I've learned is that as far as constitutional rights, human rights, the rights of natural human beings here in this hemisphere, we have to think about what those are. These are things that our universities should be tackling. What is the true source of your sovereignty? If you are an American, if you are descended from somebody who's only been here 240 years, who's not had the time to develop a sacred relationship with the waters, the lands, who's not had the time to develop that cosmology or mythology. What is your source of sovereignty here? What is the source of your very legitimacy for the American state, for the state of Canada? And it is these treaties, these internationally binding treaties. They came to us and we granted unto them, unto fledgling settler or invader states, the right of legitimacy to even be where we had civilized according to our God-given rights. Just the same institutional concepts and forces of spiritual intellect or whatever forces of institutions are currently used to subdue us. I'm an attorney, so I've been studying this for a while. But the point that I want to make, because I'm not on any like certain path here. I don't have a line of notes that I'm trying to impart to you, but is that we are all in this together right now. Those same forces, which start with currency and probably are reinforced somewhere in Santa Clara, the Santa Clara Railroad case, where corporate personhood was recognized. And that leads to things like Citizens United. And that leads to the further encroachment upon our natural rights by the corporate state. If you watch North Dakota, you saw, when you're on the front line, you see National Guard. They look like they're ready to roll into Fallujah. You see law enforcement officers, and then you see private oil mercenaries. They're all lined up together. And right now, that oil company is offering to reimburse North Dakota $38 million for the costs of suppressing peaceful, nonviolent people who are trying to exercise and protect their inherent rights, but also every American's constitutional rights. So some of those bridges, that's why I'm here. That's why I wanted to come, to try to build those bridges. But I want to thank you just for that. I know I went over time. So thank you.
Amatakiapi. My name is Nick Estes. I'm Kuli Chasha from the Lower Brule Sioux tribe. I didn't know we were going to stand today. I was planning on sitting. The Lower Brule is a small tribe, but big people. Just kidding. That's my joke. I just had to follow it up with that really intense monologue. Everybody's getting ready to get out there and take it down. Anyways, I really appreciate everyone's perspectives here. I think everyone touched on anything, so I don't really want to repeat what other people have said. Well, maybe I will repeat a couple of things. But one thing that I think that Lewis and Jace and Chase brought up was this notion of this idea of racism, that there's this idea in the Northern Plains specifically that white people have no common interest with Native people, right? And I think we often think of racism or perhaps settler colonialism as Jeffrey had brought up, as controlling indigenous populations. But in fact, racism and settler colonialism controls white people. That's what those systems were set up for. So we have to remember that racism is the control of white folks and their behaviors, especially in this particular system. So when we talk about racism, we talk about things like corporate personhood, as Chase was mentioning. We can ask what capital wants from us as indigenous peoples, but we should also ask what capital wants from white people as well. And if we go back to this history that Chase and Jeffrey had traced, we can look at 1876, or the 1870s, we can look at 1890, 1950, and 2016. And each of these moments is important, because in the 1870s, capital wanted the gold in the Black Hills. In the 1890s, capital wanted more land for white settlers in South Dakota. So that's why you have the military invasion of a place like Pine Ridge. It was to shore up ownership of the states of South Dakota and North Dakota. In the 1950s, for this capitalist agricultural development and lifestyle, you needed water and you needed jobs. And also not just water for irrigation in the Northern Plains, but the control of water downriver in St. Louis. So if we think about that in the context of what Jace had brought up in the 1944 Flood Control Act and the creation of the Pick-Sloan dams, 5 dams on the main stem of the Missouri River that flooded over 500,000 acres of land. And then we think about in the context of how much indigenous peoples lost, it was 300,000 acres of that land were native and primarily Sioux lands. And then we think of the fact that over 1,000 indigenous families were forcefully dislocated from their reservation territories. But that wasn't just a sort of top-down federalist approach. That was initiated at the ground level by white settlers at the grassroots level as well as at the state level, because they saw the dams as not just controlling a river, but also getting rid of the Indian problem, in the sense that you flood the lands, you remove the people from those lands, and therefore they don't exist politically. And if you know anything about the 1950s, we can think about the 1950s as also the era of termination and relocation. So the dams actually personified settler colonialism and personified capital, in the sense that they did the dirty work and they created jobs, right? And so we get to this post-2008 crisis, after the crisis, right? And then we have oil pipelines saving the economy at the expense of indigenous peoples again. And the oils themselves personify capital, because they solidify the settler state's control over indigenous lands, but they also solidify the Army Corps of Engineers' control of a river. And we can see coming down the pipeline, and that's kind of a pun, but not really, the privatization of indigenous lands. And so these pipelines literally inaugurate another round of termination. And so that's what history in this particular moment means. And what the water protectors have said when they say something like Miniwi Choni, right? Chase talked about it in the context of this prior contact moment. And also, Jace talked about it a little bit as well. It's a concept, right? Water is life. Of course, water is life, right? Water. You need water for agriculture. You need water to drink. But it means something more. And water protectors have forced us, with their bodies, with their lives. 800 of them were arrested. Some of them lost their eyesight. Some of them lost their limbs. They forced us to think and to ask not what capital wants from us, but what does water want from us? And so what does it mean to think with water? That's the question that we should be asking for history, and at this particular moment, because we have what some people have lightly touched on is these notions of treaties. 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. We did not sign the Fort Laramie Treaty with the state of North Dakota. We did not sign that treaty with Morton County. We signed that treaty with the federal government. And those treaties are your treaties as well. They're not just our treaties. It's not just the Indian problem. It's your problem as well. So if you want to help us, help yourselves by upholding the agreements your government made with us as people. And that's the baseline of where we can start thinking about these things. And I kind of want to end, because I don't want to be an Indian man with a microphone talking for 3 hours. I want to talk about this notion of, we brought it up a little bit, but EMAC, the Emergency Management Accountability, what is it? Assistance Compact, yeah, Emergency Management Assistance Compact. Disaster relief money that was created, or that was set aside for state governments to call on other state governments to help in case of natural disaster or some kind of disaster. The two biggest incidents, the two biggest disaster scenarios that have occurred since EMAC was passed was Baltimore, when black people, after the murder of Freddie Gray, by black police officers in Baltimore, the disaster relief money was used against that particular population, an urban population. Disaster relief money for North Dakota was used against an indigenous populations to basically force them by the barrel of the gun to accept the harmful consequences of an oil pipeline. But I also want to think about the idea that you have a government that's using chemical weapons against an indigenous population, right? According to the Hague Convention, does anybody know what the Hague Convention is? So it bans the use of chemical weapons in warfare against, in quote unquote, civilized warfare. This was passed in 1908. And if we talk about the history of the river and the denial of sovereignty and nationhood of indigenous peoples from the sort of inauguration of the settler state as it approaches or as it announces itself on our territory, and you don't sign treaties with domestic populations, you sign treaties with international, it's the longest tradition, sort of international diplomatic tradition. However, that also, by signing those treaties, bars the United States from using chemical weapons against sovereign nations. So the use of tear gas, mace, for example, which are routinely used in places such as Palestine, right, which is also an occupied country by a settler state, the Israel settler state. Israel can use tear gas and pepper spray against Palestinians because they are not considered a civilized nation. The United States can use pepper spray and tear gas against indigenous peoples trying to protect their water because we are not considered a sovereign nation or a civilized nation. And if you think I'm stretching that, I read some of the Wyoming the Wyoming, what was it, the State Highway Patrol who was deployed in Standing Rock actually references Israeli crowd control tactics as sort of a model for Morton County and EMAC law enforcement agencies against this particular population. So I'm not stretching this. They're making those connections too. The state is already intersectional. Empire is already intersectional. So we have to be intersectional in how we're thinking about these particular situations. So with that, last thing I want to talk about in that sort of context is that oil pipelines and disaster relief money become sort of new modes of expropriation. So when water and land are taken and destroyed, the past is lost with them. So too is the possibility of a livable future. And that is sort of the essence of Mini Wichoni. If there's anything that you take away from this, it's that every nation, every group of people has the right to defend themselves and their relatives. And if that relative includes water, then so be it. And that self-defense doesn't always mean violence. Self-defense sometimes means putting your body between settlers and their money. And I think we owe it to water protectors for reminding us that. So that's all I want to say. Wopila.
Thank you so much for offering these many different perspectives. What I wanted to do before opening up to the audience, which we will do very shortly, is just ask each of the panelists if they have, from the comments of others, wanted to add something or respond, and then we'll open it up to questions. Is there anyone that wants to add from comments additionally to what was already been said? Jace?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay. When other people were talking, Nick and Chase, I was thinking about, because Chase was out at the camp and Lewis spent quite a bit of time at the camp, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I was so worried about my grandchildren and my nephews and my nieces who were out at the camp. I was thinking of it more on a personal level. I don't want them to be hit with water bullets and be pepper sprayed and all that, but they were. And I see my nephews that have big bruises on their legs and their backs and so forth because they were shot with those things, and seeing them barely missing their eyes. They could have put their eyes out, their eyesight. And so, I took this very personal. I didn't want them to be harmed, yet I was very proud of them for standing up for what is right. And so it was kind of I was very upset about it, but also very proud of them. And I just wanted to say that those folks that were there, I know it was difficult living there. It was difficult times, but it was a time of unity. And I've heard my relatives say they felt like they were part of something that was really way bigger than them as mere human beings. They saw this as a movement of a beginning of something that's going to be much bigger and better than it's the start of something, in other words. And so I saw the pride in their faces. I saw the way that they connected to water and their other relatives. So I saw that unity. So in that sense, it made me very proud of them, and that they stood up. They rode, and one of the most neatest things was because of the media, we had to go by Facebook and stuff like that. And so we live in Spearfish, so in the Black Hills. And so a couple of my nephews my sons went there twice and stayed there for a time. I went twice and stayed most of the time with my aunt and 4/8 because I wanted to spend time with my auntie. But anyway, I was at the camp, and it felt good being there. But the idea is that they felt that connection, and that's carried over today. They're still thinking about, well, what do we do next? What's the next step that we do? It doesn't end here. And I like that idea of they're not giving up, they're not stopping. It wasn't a one-time thing and it's over with. It continues on. And I like that feeling, that's why they stood, and that's why they continue to stay.